There have been a lot of radical shifts in gaming culture over the past decade. It feels like different franchises are popular. People are like care about different things. It's not like it was 10 years ago when people would act like Nintendo was on the verge of going bankrupt and that they needed to cater to Western gamers now in order to stay alive. It's radically different now. And in some ways, I would say it's for the better. Actually, I would say in generally speaking, it's way better. But in others, when it comes to like fringe niche communities, it's worse. And that's kind of been a problem for me personally for a long while because this channel is about covering niche Nintendo content, hate Nintendo hate content, and what's happened over the past decade is that a lot of the hatred towards Nintendo is becoming increasingly fringe, ridiculous, and not mainstream at all. Like in the 2000s, I would say it was common to religiously hate Nintendo and say they were failing and like think Pokemon was like was on the way out. But like these days, those kind of claims are just kind of laughed at for, all sorts of different reasons. So these days, what has happened is that people who are all on board of the Nintendo hate train are doing this weird thing where they prop up random franchises to try and downplay major new Nintendo releases. So back in the day, people would hype up stuff like Halo or Final Fantasy or God of War, Devil May Cry, franchises that people genuinely liked and genuinely enjoyed. Games like Metal Gear, which would go on to be like industry classics. Games that people that had creative merit, that had things going for them, that people actually enjoyed, that were actually stylistically different than Nintendo games. Back then, people actually would talk about games that you know were actual games, actually had some kind of merit to them. These days, what's happened instead is that people will find some bare bones knockoff product of some Nintendo game and then declare it to be better than anything Nintendo has actually made. This has happened with stuff like, Pow World. This has happened recently with Sonic Racing Cross Worlds versus Mario Kart World. And, we saw a lot of this with Horizon Zero Dawn versus Breath of the Wild. Like this game is better than what Nintendo is doing, is kind of the rallying cry for these people, on social media, on YouTube and Twitter, like and other social media platforms. This is supposed to be the big milestone release of the year, the game of the year, like Baldur's Gate 3, way better than Tears of the Kingdom. This is like the rallying cry for the pretend for Nintendo hate, is this idea that like this superficial game somehow like surpasses everything Nintendo has ever done. And not only is that not true, these games very quickly fall by the wayside. And because of how they promoted themselves as Nintendo hate like centers, eventually Nintendo fans really grow to hate and despise these games and want nothing to do with them. So, just as an example, we'll cover the most recent example of this, Sonic Racing Cross Worlds. This was supposed to be a game that was way better than Mario Kart World. This was hyped up as being this huge deal, this huge phenomenon. It was supposed to destroy Mario Kart World. It was supposed to be this amazing thing. Sonic was back, baby. This was a renaissance of Sonic games. Nintendo wouldn't know what hit them. This would be the best kart racer this year. And yeah, like not a single thing was said about the game itself, what it offers, what differentiates itself from Mario Kart World. Not a single thing was said about the tracks, the visual, the designs. Nobody said anything about the game itself at all. The only thing anybody would talk about when it came to it was this idea that it would be better than Mario Kart World. Like, I don't know how it was supposed to be better, but that was the entire narrative going into this. So this behavior, to people who like and enjoy Mario Kart World was off-putting. I didn't appreciate this. And I am the core demographic because, as someone who bought and played Mario Kart World and enjoyed it, obviously I would be up to playing a different racing game from a different developer that might do things a little bit differently, that might be reasonably enjoyable, right? But Sonic Racing Cross Worlds, with this marketing tactic, straight up drove me away because if the game can't stand on its own 2 feet, if it can't, actually promote itself without bringing up the competition, then it isn't worth my time because it isn't really doing anything to get me excited about its merits. It's just telling us over and over again that I'm better than Mario. I'm better than Mario, and I'm just like, if that was true, you wouldn't have to say it. And that's kind of like how I felt about the Sonic brand for since the beginning, is that it's always hinged on this idea on gaslighting retards into thinking that Sonic the Hedgehog was somehow a cooler, more mature, more intense brand than Super Mario, when in reality that isn't true at all. It was all smoke and mirrors, but we're getting to the point now where people have seen this song and dance so much that they're willing to reject it outright. Because we saw this with Horizon Zero Dawn. We saw this with Elden Ring and Baldur's Gate 3. Every single time people scream about how a game is better than Nintendo, it just really raises a lot of red flags for fans. And honestly, like whenever this happens, it can, with Sonic Racing Cross Worlds specifically, I noticed that a lot of people who would have gotten the game otherwise have elected to simply not buy it because of just how antagonistic the ads have become and just how out of touch with reality they have become. Because there was no chance that Sonic Racing Cross Worlds would ever compete with Mario Kart. Like zero. It just wasn't going to happen. Mario Kart's a way more established brand. It's like the most popular kart racer in the world. Sonic's like an F tier brand in comparison. But the narrative, this idea that Sonic Racing was going to be the beginning of Sonic like getting one up over Mario, like it just wasn't going to happen. As fast as Sonic can run or race in his car, he's never ever going to catch up with Mario. It just isn't going to happen. And that is why people are so put off by these kind of marketing campaigns. Like I grew up with being told that Sonic was bigger than Mario, that Sonic was this huge deal, that Sonic was this cultural phenomenon. And what happened? Sega left the console industry. The games declined in Sega left the console industry. The games declined in quality. What has Sega done in the past 30 years to warrant this idea that Sonic is in any way competitive with Mario? We've been told this for years, that Sonic is on the verge of a comeback, and yet it never comes. Why exactly am I supposed to be fired up about this blue rat when Mario Galaxy is about to be re-released, when Final Fantasy Tactics has just been re-released, when I'm playing through Tales of Symphonia for the first time, when I'm still playing Mario Kart World? I have so many other games to play that honestly, I don't think I would have bothered with Sonic Racing Cross Worlds, even if it was releasing in a desert of releases. Looking at this game, hearing about it, I don't hear anything positive other than all of these comparisons to Mario Kart World. The game simply doesn't stand on its own merits at all. The only reason anybody is talking about it is out of a desperate attempt to try and downplay Mario Kart World, downplay Nintendo Switch 2, and continue this facade that Nintendo cannot compete going forward. And it really needs to be said that this kind of mindset needs to be disregarded. It needs to be called out. Mario Kart World is a fantastic game that's going to go on to sell tens of millions of units, while Sonic Racing Cross Worlds is going to be in a bargain bin by the holiday season. Like, this was never a game that was going to compete or do well, and yet we were led to believe this was gonna be some major cultural phenomenon. This is not an isolated incident. This is becoming more and more common with every major Nintendo release where someone like everyone points to some other game that no one cares about, whether it's Digimon or Horizon Zero Dawn or Baldur's Gate 3, and tries to declare it as being way better than whatever Nintendo is doing. And not only is that not true, it completely disregards what Nintendo's other projects and things that aren't competing with that like it's just ridiculous. And it does to be need to be called out more often that and other IPs like it really do not have a leg to stand on when it comes to competing